There's a curious theory that emerges whenever the ongoing Red Bull and Honda engine collaboration or a possible 2026 project become a talking point in Formula One, however briefly. The conspiracy essentially contends that Red Bull and Honda have gamed the system by getting an engine freeze agreed under false pretenses. To buy into it, you need to believe that Honda never really intended to leave F1 and never actually did. The world of F1 is forever evolving, and looking forward with many teams keeping one eye on the 2023 and another eye on the 2026 engine regulations. Mercedes, Red Bull powertrains, and Audi have all formally registered their interest in creating powertrains under the new 2026 regulations. Honda has also registered their interest in being a 2026 engine supplier. What does this mean for Red Bull, and who could be their new partner after a very successful partnership with Honda? For any new F1 fans, a powertrain system includes the engine, transmission, and drivetrain. As you can imagine, it is the key to a car's performance, a statement echoed by Adrian Newey, the engineering genius of Red Bull. Newey recently admitted that he is still determining what the future holds at Red Bull after the 10% reduction in wind tunnel time due to the FIA finding them guilty of a minor cost cap breach. He is sure that Red Bull learned one thing when Mercedes dominated from 2014 to 2021, winning 15 of the 16 world titles available and an unprecedented 8 Constructors' Championships. Asked if he had learned anything during this period of dominance, Newey said, "Have a decent engine. We went into the hybrid era, and Renault got it wrong, so that was pretty depressing because you realize that in the foreseeable future if you do a spectacular job, you might snatch the odd win, but you're never going to win a championship." That was a reset. I think one of the strengths of the team is that we put our heads down and got through that period so that once we had a good power unit again with a partnership with Honda, we were able to respond. Honda announced in late 2020 it would be quitting F1 officially at the end of the 2021 season. The F1 project had come at enormous expense. At the time there were just a few wins to show for it, and Honda needed to redirect its financial and technical resources into carbon-neutral projects because the company had fallen behind its automotive rivals. Shortly after Honda's decision was made public, it became very clear that a deal was on the cards for the two Red Bull-owned teams to continue to use Honda's engines from 2022 to the end of 2025. With Max Verstappen winning the world title in the 2021 season, it was a great way to bow out for Honda. The initial form of this deal envisaged that Honda would develop its 2021 engine to be compatible with a small fuel change for 2022, then operate as a contractor in 2022, helping with the assembly and maintenance of the engines. A new company set up by Red Bull, called Red Bull Powertrains, would take over the running of the engines in 2023 before being expanded and tasked with building an in-house engine in 2026. Red Bull went on to win both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships in the 2022 F1 season. After that excellent return, Honda now looks to be back in F1 after it was announced at the Japanese Grand Prix that the famous HRC logo would return after Honda and Red Bull announced they would be enhancing their relationship. In between all this happening, what Red Bull knew would not be possible was to develop an engine in the interim by themselves. Even a rapidly created powertrains division would not have the capacity or expertise to develop an engine in 2022. This was the gap that needed to be filled because a freeze was coming for 2023 anyway. The hybrid era had long been too complicated and expensive, performance was converging and new rules were slowly being drafted too for 2025, which is now pushed back to 2026 in the end. The freeze was going to happen for the start of 2023. Red Bull just pushed for it to be brought forward so that engine specifications would be frozen and no performance updates would be allowed after the end of the 2021 season. This was very much a case of Red Bull wanting to have its cake and eat it. There are provisions in FONS regulations that would have forced another manufacturer to supply both Red Bull Racing and AlphaTauri with engines. In this case, the firm with capacity to supply engines and which have been compelled by FONS rules to do so would have been Renault, which had not long left a fractious Red Bull relationship. And Red Bull wanted to avoid being a customer again, knowing that Honda was working on a very good development for 2021 so its engine would probably be an outright more competitive prospect. Fortunately for Red Bull, other manufacturers and key figures in F1 were broadly in agreement already, and after several months of debate at the end of 2020 and into the start of 2021, F1 agreed to introduce the first engine freeze of the V6 turbo hybrid era in 2022. There were compromises made on both sides, including a couple of key ones versus what Red Bull proposed. Some parts only had to be homologated in March 2022 or even in early autumn, depending on the components, which was a bit later than Red Bull wanted, and there would be no form of regulatory insurance that gave dispensation to someone with a clear performance disadvantage to develop the engine and catch up. Red Bull was undeniably a winner out of this. It had gained itself a bit of insurance. Honda would still leave, but Red Bull would be able to keep using an engine that took a big step in 2021 and knew that rivals wouldn't benefit from an extra year of development that Red Bull couldn't match. Within that specific band of circumstances, it is perhaps understandable that Red Bull's critics have not been particularly pleased to see little sign of Honda really leaving since then. To see a revised deal agreed so that Honda actually continues to maintain the engines on Red Bull's behalf anyway. To see the loss of stickers and official naming rights undone in late 2022, or to see that Red Bull and Honda might work together on a 2026 engine project as well. This has been interpreted by some to be an underhand approach from Red Bull, which pleaded technical poverty on the grounds Honda would be leaving and Red Bull simply had to have an early engine freeze, only for Honda to stick around after all and help more than anyone expected, locking in whatever performance and associated advantage Honda had given Red Bull by the end of 2021 at the same time. The fact that Honda could come back in 2026, and there could even be a new Red Bull-Honda collaboration, is also taken to be some kind of proof that Honda never really intended to quit and Red Bull never really intended to go it alone with Red Bull powertrains. Essentially, it's been a grand mirage to serve a higher purpose for both parties. But that's not really the case at all, because some details have been badly misconstrued and other key details are just ignored altogether. Honda had the embarrassment of having to publicly announce it was walking away, yet again, from a massively expensive and, at the time, ultimately unsuccessful F1 project. It then had to fund a massively accelerated development plan to get its final engine ready for 2021, not 2022, but missed out on a ton of marketing potential with that engine even as it went on to help Red Bull break records and win both titles. At the same time, Red Bull has spent a fortune building up powertrains. The initial documents for 2021 indicate that Red Bull's parent company spent over £100 million in that year alone, and the cost has undoubtedly been far greater. Neither Red Bull nor Honda would put themselves through all of that, just to sneak an engine freeze through 1 year early. It was what was necessary at the time, before things started to change, largely because Honda had a change in CEO between announcing its F1 exit in October 2020 and its departure date 1 year later. Honda's bid to unpick the decision to quit and the continuation project that had to be put in place around that just shows how rubbish the initial plan was. It's undoing some incompetence rather than being a sign of malice. It's also worth considering that while Honda was eventually willing to remain on board as a contractor for longer than intended, that doesn't mean that anything else would have been possible. There is a difference between an agreement in which Honda is paid or receives payment in kind to simply maintain the Red Bull engine, which is the case now, and Honda flat out developing the engines in 2022, which would have been necessary if the freeze hadn't been brought forward, as that would have come at a much increased cost and capacity that neither party could facilitate. Ultimately, Red Bull has ended up with a friendlier deal than expected, as Honda is doing more than was initially outlined. But as easy as it is to connect the dots, there is no grand conspiracy around Honda's shifting willingness to stay involved in F1 or not. It is just another example of the manufacturer's impossibly frustrating flakiness. There is one legitimate area of concern about how this has played out and what it means for the future, though. While Red Bull would have preferred a much calmer and cheaper past 18 months than the one Honda inflicted, this saga has nudged Red Bull into a direction that helps it long term, assuming Red Bull Powertrains does a good job with its first in-house F1 engine, of course. If there's any point of contention in Red Bull's engine situation, it's the specific conditions of a potential Honda comeback in 2026. A future Red Bull-Honda collaboration has been discussed, and Honda is interested in an official F1 return in 2026. But it is no guarantee, and Red Bull is said to have other options still, including just going it alone, as it always intended. If Red Bull and Honda work together for 2026, though, they will still attempt to be considered a new manufacturer, presumably on the basis that Powertrains is a bona fide new combustion engine manufacturer, assuming Honda would only work on the hybrid, as has been suggested. New manufacturer status means being eligible for various concessions, more spending power and dyno time, mainly. The idea of Red Bull and Honda getting this, even though they've been working together for several years and would have a lot of experience, expertise, and relevant technology to tap into, would not go down well with rivals at all. Don't be fooled by a conspiracy theory around what Red Bull maneuvered for itself in 2022, but what's still in play for 2026 and beyond may yet carry real consequences. I might be wrong here, thinking that a Red Bull-Honda collab for 2026 could be possible, but all I could do is theorize the finding. I have to give a reliable conclusion. But what if my theory is wrong about Red Bull-Honda collaboration in 2026? Red Bull is only open to a collaboration under strict terms. The primary term is that the powertrain must be entirely built in-house, and the manufacturer only commits to the name. Porsche had already been rejected by Red Bull as they wanted complete control of the process around the engine, and with Marko and Horner having full autonomy at Red Bull. Let's just say this wasn't going to fly. Honda has now also dropped out of the race, with reports saying that Honda wants to train their engineers and gain new technology, which again would be swiftly rejected by Horner. There are still two options for Red Bull, with Ford and Alfa Romeo in the running to collaborate with Red Bull. Ford has a rich history in Formula One, first being involved in the sport back in 1966, and it seems reasonable that they would enjoy a return to the pinnacle of racing. Adding fuel to the fire is that Ford is third on the all-time list of F1 victories, and to make that sound even crazier, they left the sport in 2004. It is improbable that Ford will return in a technical capacity, but rather as a significant sponsor for Red Bull, almost identical to how Honda and Red Bull operate now. For Red Bull powertrains, the financial investment in such a venture would be helpful and outside the Red Bull racing budget cap, with the head of Ford's global performance neither confirming nor denying that the vehicle giant would be joining F1. It is certainly true that there is plenty of speculation about this, but that is nothing to which we will respond to substantively, said Rushbrook. If Honda does leave Red Bull, it is doubtful that their performance will decline, with Red Bull having one of, if not the best engineers on the track, Adrian Newey. Horner recently heaped praise on Newey, citing him as the primary reason behind Red Bull's success. Adrian is the only bloke that can see air, he lives in the Matrix, and he's been the conductor of the technical orchestra for all these years now, but he's still very hands-on and at his drawing board. I had to argue with Ron Dennis to wrestle him out of McLaren. We've obviously had highs and lows during all these years, but it's always been fun. We've always had great support from the group, from Dietrich Mateschitz and from Helmut Marko, and that's enabled us to just focus on being the best race team that we can be, said Horner. Even with a great team like Red Bull, you can't help but wonder how the latest sanctions will affect them. Two-time world champion Max Verstappen admits he is worried but is sure his team can make it happen. That will hurt us, Verstappen told Auto Motor on Sport. But I'm still confident my team can pull it off and we'll get off to a good start, the Dutchman added. We know where to start and what to work on. If we were at a loss as to which direction to go in, it would be an even greater problem. We will learn how much we actually suffer from it over the course of the year. But our car was competitive and if we keep the momentum going, it should be fine. If you back a team into a corner, they will come out swinging, and we are confident Max and the crew will do that. But how will they approach it? Will a Red Bull-Honda power unit collaboration as per what I theorized work? Or will Red Bull think of someone outside the box to partner with? Comment down below and let me know what you think of the theories I presented you guys with. Thank you for watching our video today, and if you enjoy our content, subscribe to the channel and have that notifications bell turned on to be made aware of our future uploads, as we have plenty coming up during this Formula One off season.